It all began with a video, raw, emotional, and impossible to ignore. In it, a woman vented her frustrations about being bullied at work. "She's a bully," she repeated again and again. "Somebody needs to stop her." That woman was 27-year-old Afeni Mohammed, an employee at a McDonald's in East Point, Michigan. Not long after that video appeared online, her manager, Jennifer Harris, was found dead, and prosecutors now say the two events were tragically connected. After months of silence, a major update has turned this case on its head. But before we get to that, let's go back to how everything began. A story that started on social media and spiraled into one of the most shocking workplace crimes in recent memory. According to investigators, on July 10th, Afeni got into a heated argument with her manager after being told to go home early. Witnesses say she left the restaurant, sat in her car for a while, and then, according to police, returned with a knife. When officers arrived, Jennifer Harris had been stabbed multiple times. A customer armed with a gun stepped in and stopped Afeni from escaping. Harris was rushed to the hospital, but she didn't survive. The next day, Afeni appeared in court for her arraignment. Detectives revealed disturbing details that before leaving the restaurant, she allegedly told Harris, "I'll be back." They say she then drove to a nearby park, sat alone, and thought about what to do next before returning to confront her manager. Authorities claim she wore a hooded mask to hide her face and tried to flee after the attack, but was stopped by the armed customer. Afeni was charged with first-degree, premeditated murder and carrying a dangerous weapon with unlawful intent. Prosecutors also labeled her a habitual offender because of a prior conviction in Virginia. Her bond was set at $25 million, with strict conditions if she were ever released, including GPS monitoring, drug testing, and a no-contact order with the victim's family. A few weeks later, her defense attorney filed a motion requesting a competency and criminal responsibility evaluation to determine whether Afeni understood the legal process and could participate in her own defense. This tragic case has raised tough questions about workplace conflict, mental health, and how anger can spiral into irreversible violence. And what happens next in court will determine whether Afeni Mohammed spends the rest of her life behind bars. When Afeni Mohammed returned to court in early October, all eyes were on one central question. Was she competent to stand trial? That question had been hanging over this case like a cloud for months. During the review hearing, the judge acknowledged receipt of a report dated September 17, 2025, from a forensic center, the same document that experts had been quietly preparing. Behind the scenes, both the prosecution and the defense agreed to accept that report's findings. That agreement was significant. It meant the competing legal sides would not challenge the expert evaluation itself in court, and it allowed the case to move forward. The judge formally confirmed that Afeni had been found competent to stand trial. With that legal hurdle cleared, the court scheduled her preliminary examination for November 14, 2025. This hearing will act as a kind of mini-trial, a test of whether the prosecution's evidence is strong enough to push the case toward a full trial. Prosecutor Peter Lucido issued a public statement after the ruling, saying the decision ensures Afeni can be held responsible through the legal system. He described the allegations against her as brutal and emphasized the office's commitment to justice for the victim's family. So what did that competency evaluation entail? According to legal precedent and practices that apply in such cases, experts focus on whether the defendant understands the charges, the courtroom roles, judge, prosecutor, defense attorney, and whether the person can assist in their defense. They do not probe into the facts of the crime at that stage. In Afeni's case, the evaluation determined she met those criteria. She was ruled capable of participating in her trial, to respond to evidence, consult with counsel, and understand what's at stake. With the competency barrier removed, the focus now shifts to the preliminary examination. This is where the prosecution presents key witnesses, lays bare some of its case, and the defense gets to challenge or poke holes in the state's evidence. If the judge finds sufficient cause, the case will be bound over to trial. For Afeni's defense, the stakes have changed. They can no longer stall on competency arguments. Now they must contest the evidence itself, build counter-narratives, and anticipate how the prosecution will frame motive, intent, and mental state. As this case proceeds, one big question looms. Will the defense push for more mental health evidence at trial? Could they bring in expert witnesses to testify about her mindset, emotional stress, impulse control, even trigger doubt about premeditation? They might, but they'll have to do it within legal boundaries, without revealing every preliminary behind-the-scenes step. That's the landscape now. Afeni is ready for her preliminary hearing. The case is formally back in motion. The trial path lies ahead, and every move from here will shape how this story is told and judged. If you're following this case and want to stay updated as it develops, make sure you hit subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. On November 14th, 2025, Afeni will face a preliminary examination, sometimes called a probable cause hearing. That's not the full trial. It's a gatekeeping step. The prosecutor will present key evidence and witness testimony to show there's enough grounds to proceed. The defense will have the opportunity to cross-examine, challenge credibility, and try to poke holes in the state's case. If the judge finds sufficient cause, the case is bound over and moves into full trial. In many serious criminal cases, this hearing also reveals what the prosecution believes are their strongest pieces, a preview of their theory of the crime. It gives the defense invaluable insight into how the state plans to prove motive, intent, and means. If the evidence is too weak, the judge can dismiss some or all charges. But given how strong the initial presentation has looked, social media statements, eyewitness interventions, physical evidence, many expect the case to advance. Once before a jury, the case will have several stages. 1. Jury selection, picking jurors who can be fair and impartial. 2. Opening statements. Each side frames its narrative. State tells what they believe happened. Defense previews the counterstory. 3. Prosecution's presentation, witnesses, forensic evidence, crime scene experts, possibly someone who intervened to stop the attack. 4. Defense presentation, cross-examination, expert witnesses, perhaps in mental health or psychology, and alternative narratives, e.g. lack of intent, impulsive act, self-defense, emotional distress. 5. Closing arguments. Each side sums up, highlighting strengths and weaknesses. 6. Jury instructions. Judge explains the legal standards jurors must follow, premeditation, burden of proof, self-defense, etc. 7. Jury deliberation and verdict. Jury decides whether she's guilty or not guilty on each count, because the jury will not hear about the prior competency proceedings or the forensic center's internal reports. The trial remains focused solely on the evidence and arguments related to the crime. If the state introduces mental health testimony, it must be done carefully, without revealing what was privately reviewed in competency evaluations. The defense may try to humanize Afeni, explain her emotional state or past trauma, and highlight uncertainties in the prosecution's narrative. Given the facts, here are paths the defense might consider. Argue lack of premeditation or impulsivity. Instead of a cool, calculated murder, the defense could push that the act was driven by emotional stress or sudden overwhelm, stressing that the decision to return with a weapon was not fully formed in advance. Challenge eyewitness or intervention testimony. They might question how reliable the person was who intervened, how clear their view was, and whether their perception was accurate. Introduce expert testimony on mental health. While the jury won't see the competency report, the defense may bring in experts to explain emotional regulation, trigger response, impulse control, or trauma, without referencing confidential evaluations. Mitigation in sentencing. If guilt is admitted or proven on some counts, the defense will aim to present mitigating factors, past struggles, mental health history, remorse, or absence of prior serious convictions outside the Virginia case. They may argue for life with possibility of parole rather than life without parole. Negotiate plea deals. If the evidence seems overwhelming, it's possible the defense and prosecution may negotiate a lesser charge or plea agreement before trial fully begins. Though with first-degree charges and a $25 million bond, that may be harder to accomplish. Deciding whether she testifies. That's a major strategic decision. If she takes the stand, she exposes herself to cross-examination, including about her video statements or social media behavior. It could humanize her, or it could backfire. Often in serious homicide cases, defendants do not testify to avoid that risk. Because she's charged with first-degree premeditated murder, a conviction could carry life in prison without parole under Michigan law. If convicted on lesser charges, if negotiations or jury decisions reduce counts, sentencing could include decades in prison. Her prior Virginia conviction could potentially influence sentencing, painting a pattern of violent behavior. Although the degree to which prior acts are allowed in court is controlled by rules of evidence and the judge's discretion. As the trial approaches, here's what to watch. Asterisk how strongly the prosecution frames motive and intent, especially using her video, statements, and past conduct. Asterisk how the defense counters. Can they humanize her and generate reasonable doubt about intent? Asterisk which witnesses get called. Co-workers, intervening customer, forensic analysts, mental health experts. Asterisk jury instructions and how legal definitions, premeditation, self-defense, emotional state, are framed. Asterisk whether a plea deal emerges before trial, which can shift the direction entirely. Asterisk whether a Feeney testifies, her decision there may turn into a pivotal moment. This case is now set on its final path. No more procedural holds. The November preliminary exam is the next big turning point. But the spotlight will truly be on the trial itself. How prosecutors tell the story, how the defense responds, and whether a jury finds a Feeney guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.